In the next few minutes, we're going to go through an example of using ELFLAN using the southeastern United States. And so as we do this, it'll be for the southeast, but you can look at how you would use the same approach for your own parts of the country. So the first part of ELFLAN, the E, is establish contact. This is probably one of the most difficult and time-consuming parts of all of the ELFLAN approach. There's a huge network of climate information, tools, and data providers that already exist. They exist in the Southeast. They exist in every part of the United States. Now, exactly the types or the names of these providers may vary, but some examples of them are the Natural Resource Conservation Service staff, which is in each county, State Extension, which is associated with your university, land-grant universities. There are different climate consortiums. So climate consortiums are a development of the federal government, extension with universities. There's also state foresters. There are also something called climate science centers. Climate science centers were developed by the United States Geological Service, and they're located across the United States, as well as land conservation cooperatives, and then all kinds of regional examples, including for the Southeast, Delta Farm Press, Minority Landowner Magazine, and others. So a lot of this is finding out who those people are, and then once you learn who they are, contact them, establish that contact, and then attend some of their meetings or attend some of their functions. So in this case, you may in the Southeast spend a lot of time at picnics and barbecues and social functions, just learning about the people and the issues that they have. Now this is independent of climate change, because climate change is just one aspect of all of the things that landowners and land managers need to be doing. And so you can't just ask about climate change or you're going to miss the broader picture of all of their concerns. So when you go to these types of functions, learn about the people and their general issues, and then think about how climate change may be impacting them, but don't start with climate change. Another way to get input from folks is to have webinars and solicit input. So if you have some ideas about what climate change impacts might be within the region, invite people to a webinar or to a meeting or a lecture, and then solicit their input as to whether you were on target or not, or what additional types of information or data you should be considering when you're considering what climate change impacts to focus on. And then contact tool and information developers to hear what they've already developed or could develop in addition for additional assistance. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of tools and resources that already exist. So don't reinvent the wheel when you're trying to understand how you could communicate climate change and its needs for adaptation management. Next in the ELFLAN approach is the F, and that is find commonality. So if you're talking about climate change and you're interested in adaptation measures, there's a good chance that your concerns aren't shared by the audience that you're talking to, depending on what audience that is. As I said before, most land managers, foresters, farmers, ranchers, generally don't have climate change on their list of major issues, largely because they don't understand it, and also partially because there's some maybe bias against it because of political orientation. So these are factors that are just realities and that need to be addressed. But if you're addressing climate change, there may be an immediate distrust about you because this is not a common shared concern. In a recent survey by Yale called the Climate Communication Project, Bridging Science and Society, they did a series of survey questions to the American public asking what their beliefs were regarding climate change and its impact. And in that particular survey, they cited that the American population often doesn't believe in climate change. So what they do believe in is they believe that if climate change is going to happen, it's going to be in the future. But climate change isn't really happening now. Well, that's not what most scientists believe. Most scientists have a very different opinion, and that opinion hasn't been shared by the American public. So again, what you may believe may be very different from what your audience believes. So one of the things that's really necessary is to find a commonality between your beliefs and the general population beliefs, so that you can have the basis for beginning to talk about what can be done to adapt to climate change. So I like to use a simple survey to find that commonality, and here's what it looks like. First question would be something like asking the audience, has climate varied in the past? Will it vary in the future? And would we experience climate variability regardless of anything that people may or may not do? And you can ask your audience to raise their hand. So it's just saying, is climate variable and will it be variable regardless of people? Well, in every audience I've ever given this to, virtually everyone in the audience raises their hand. Because regardless of where you live, you know that there's a lot of variability in the season, in the months, in the days, and even within a day there's a lot of variability. So everybody agrees that there is variability associated with climate. The second question, is current climate variability negatively impacting your lands? So whether those lands are forest, range, or grasslands, if you're talking to a bunch of foresters or a bunch of farmers and they don't say that climate variability has a negative impact, then they're not telling themselves the truth, because it does, and everyone does. And so when you ask that question, everyone raises their hand again. And then you say, well, we agree with you. We agree with that too. We think that climate variability does have a negative impact. And then you ask the third question, will future climate variability likely impact your land? And the question, or the answer to that, is always, again, almost always everyone's hand raises. Because folks realize that if it's been variable in the past and the present, it's likely to be variable in the future. And you agree with that. And then the final question is, if you could manage your land to better adapt to current and future climate variability, would you? So that'd be like asking a farmer, if you could manage your land so that you're less susceptible to drought or flooding, would you do that? And of course, no farmer is going to refuse the opportunity to make that happen, or forester to manage their lands. And so everyone raises their hand, and you raise your hand. And so at this point, you've agreed that climate is variable and that it causes problems and that you want to do something about it. Now, what you haven't talked about is the cause of that climate, or if that climate is changing more in the future than it has in the past. But really, that's not the issue on a first meeting. This is sort of your first date with someone. And you don't want to kind of ask all the questions right away. You just want to find some common ground. And so as you develop your relationship with your partners, your cooperators and the people you're working with, then you may begin to say, well, one thing that we've seen is that climate may not be as variable now as it was in the past. Or maybe it's going to become more variable in the future. And so those are the questions you can bring up then. But for now, it's important just to say that climate is variable and that there's something you want to do about it. So you've gotten past the ELF part of ELFland.